Welcome to Season 2 of Rooted and Reaching, a podcast about startups, entrepreneurs, and innovation in the South Bend, Elkhart region of Indiana. I'm Marty Mechtenberg.
And I'm Susan Ford. We're excited to share 16 new stories with you this year. And we're going to get tactical about how entrepreneurs are confronting challenges, building success, and moving our region into the future.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Rooted and Reaching in our season number 2. We are lucky today to have Richard Worsham of Janus Motorcycles here with us to talk about his entrepreneurial journey, which I think has been a very interesting one, and I can't wait to dig into it with you.
Great. I'm really glad to be here and have a great conversation.
Yeah. So I did such deep research on you, Richard, that I looked up some of your old friends from your moped days.
Okay.
Is moped the right word?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. As long as when you say moped, you know what that means. It's not a scooter like you see riding around most of the time around here with the floorboards and the...
Right. This is like a Vespa style
no,
device,
a Vespa is a scooter.
A Vespa is a scooter.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is what you're talking about. It's
no,
not that.
A moped is a little lightweight 50cc vehicle, but it has pedals.
Oh,
so
no kidding.
moped stands for motor and pedals.
Okay.
So it's often misapplied today to include scooters, which are
I see.
They look kind of like a Vespa.
Yes. Okay, I misunderstood that. Yep. So right away you're correcting us. That's so you can choose to pedal or choose to. Yeah, I mean, is it kind of like an electric vehicle today, where it's like a hybrid thing? You go back and forth.
In theory, but pedaling a moped is really hard.
Okay.
You can do it. Usually, it's used just to start it, and then you.
Why do they have pedals then? Oh, is it just a way to get
It's a way to get it started, and I think it was a way to get around some regulation.
I see.
Maybe at one point, and probably you can pedal it. So theoretically, you can, but it's a lot heavier than a bicycle. Got
it. So two-stroke gasoline
typically
engine,
50cc.
50cc.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I look back. Well, I happened to work with a woman named Lori who who knew you from those days.
Yes.
So I had heard about you before I had even taken this job and before I was working with entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Because I worked with Lori for a few years at the city. So
great. Well, Lori's a dear friend.
Yeah. I had heard some of your adventures. And they did. It sounds like some actually really unique adventures, because who joins a moped club?
It's pretty wild.
Yeah. So tell us about that.
Okay.
Like, who does join a moped club for real?
There's a couple of ways to answer that. I mean, definitely not someone who's interested in kind of looking like a macho motorcycle dude.
Yeah, it's like if there's a Harley on one end, the moped is
right
on the other.
That's
end.
That's a kind of a perspective. Yeah. There's two opposite ends of the spectrum.
Got it.
And then that's a great kind of intro to my starting point with motorcycles. Did not begin with being fascinated with either Ducatis on, like fast European bikes, or loud, big American hogs, as they say. Neither of those interested me. My mother growing up did have a vintage Vespa. Okay. And so that wasn't the first motorized two-wheeler I had, but it was the first one I had a real experience with. And there was a 50cc too.
50cc, just
two-stroke. And so I went to school on the East Coast at a little school called Thomas More up in New Hampshire, actually, and then went straight from there to Notre Dame for grad school for architecture, and yeah. Well,
I want to ask you more about that as well.
Yeah.
Because you're a designer. You can see that through your work very clearly. Also, it happens that I'm an architect myself.
Are you really?
I went to University of Michigan.
Okay.
So a competing school. So we'll have to
we'll get into that.
Get into some design things a little bit. But keep going on with the moped.
Yeah. So during my undergrad, it was really a continuation from when I was young. I like to draw a lot, and my father is also an architect. Yeah. So I grew up in a household. He worked either from home or in an office very close to home, self-employed when we were young. And so I was just very the drawing, hand drafting was like very much a part of the house. My mother has an architectural history degree. So they're just like buildings, and historic architecture was a big part of that.
Got it.
But seeing these drawings was a big thing, and cross sections were a big thing as well. And so that architectural kind of way of looking at the world was really big for me. And then also representing things in orthographic sort of, especially cross sections, just fascinating me. Like Stephen Bestie, I don't know if you remember those books. They're cross sections, like exploded books.
Yes,
like the Titanic or trains.
Amazing,
just fascinated me as a kid because of that. And so I drew a lot of stuff like that. And so that really just carried through. Really, I was interested in cars and car design, and I kind of branched away a little bit away from my family in that while my family has an appreciation for old cars, nothing expensive or anything like that, just like old Volkswagens or Volvos or whatever. I was just interested in the design of like vintage Ferraris or, just these things that just have a lot of appeal aesthetically. And so I was drawing those and trying to sketch out, starting to kind of learn about suspension design and stuff like the engines on a very, youthful level.
But so even at a young age though, you were drawn to that level of design
with cars. With motorcycles really. And my dad took us to vintage races, so like historic car races. So I got to see my first like an old 250, Ferrari GT. I remember I saw my first F40, and it was just like really, really cool. I knew what it was, and I learned in books.
And you
the
saw
internet didn't exist,
right? And there it was in real life.
There it was,
right?
and I got to take a picture with my old film camera, and I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, excellent.
So then in undergrad, I started being interested in motorcycle design, just from, and I really mean this from a aesthetic perspective. I was drawing them like, okay, these are really interesting looking.
That's cool.
And I just thought it was really cool. I really wasn't interested in riding one at that point. It hadn't even crossed my mind.
You were just,
and it was like, literally, this is kind of dangerous. Why would you go on 2 wheels when you could have 4? So eventually kind of a bug bit there with, and I encountered this thing called the moped army, which is as ridiculous as it sounds. Their motto is "Swarm and Destroy."
Definitely need to hear more.
And they were actually founded in Kalamazoo.
No kidding.
And it was.
Did you discover that when you came here, or was this back when you were in New Hampshire?
Before. No, this is actually while I was in New Hampshire and in Virginia. So over the breaks, I would be looking up mopeds, and they had this website. There was like a forum website, pre-Facebook, really. Well, definitely. And so I thought this is really interesting. They have gangs. And it was just kind of almost a parody, but fun.
When Lori first explained this to me too, it definitely felt like a parody, like a moped gang. It's like a gang of pigeons or something.
Right. It's like 100%.
Like the least intimidating thing, but in a gang.
Yeah. And so we would all. Well, anyway, I guess. Yeah. So I finally just got obsessed with it. Bought myself a moped. Yeah. I got a 1978 Garelli, which is this classic Italian, really looks like a small motorcycle, like a tiny motorcycle. It's a top tank. It's not a step through, except it has pedals. And so I got low bars on it, and I upgraded the engine, and thought it was really cool. And so, not knowing anything about Indiana, I mean, the only reason I decided to go to Notre Dame was because of the architecture program. I brought that as my only means of transportation.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So you didn't drive it here though?
No, I put it on the roof of my car or my parents' car and just carted it out here.
Yeah.
And quickly realized there's something called lake effect, and it wouldn't work in the wintertime. I tried.
Seasonal activity. Yeah.
So, but through that, I realized, hey, there's actually a moped chapter or gang in Elkhart.
Okay.
And so with the first week I was here, I rode my bike out, met the owner of the shop, and kind of like met a crowd of people. And really, I think I identified with that group more than anyone even at the university. So I immediately went townie.
Yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy. So you're at Notre Dame, this very elite institution, studying architecture in a classical form at Notre Dame.
A very different kind of architecture program than basically anywhere else in the world.
Right. And on the flip side, you're hanging out with these townies, riding mopeds and in a gang. Yeah. Were there all ages? Men, women?
Yeah, men, women.
Young,
absolutely.
young,
co-ed experience completely. Yeah. We were all probably in our teens, 19 to 24, I think was really, and I was probably right in the middle, 20, something like that at the time, 21. And just having a blast. We would meet on Wednesday night and wrench on bikes, go on a ride, get something to eat, come back, hang out, and then I would ride back, and then oftentimes go right into the studio. And if you know architecture,
I sure do.
Work until 3 or 4 in the morning.
Yep.
So that was what got me hooked. And then going to rallies, and we would basically, the whole idea of the Moped Army is your group will then go to meet with other groups, and you have a rally. And that it's kind of a universal
rally
activity.
Is it a race, or is it just sort of a big meetup?
It's just a big meetup, exactly. And so the idea is that you meet and then you swarm and destroy. So you imagine 300 vintage two-strokes all riding together through like Louisville, Kentucky, or Cincinnati, or LA.
Yes, I can imagine the heads turning.
It's just incredible, like just giant clouds of blue smoke. It sounds like a million chainsaws. It's just so much fun.
No, I have to ask. I mean, you're wearing a nice jacket right now. Did you have chapter gang jackets?
We always stayed really clear of ever looking like we were in a moped or a motorcycle gang.
Got it.
It wasn't really an interest, but we did. We would have the classic moped kid look would be like a denim jacket with a big patch on the back that would say what gang you were in.
Perfect.
Very different looking. You look more like a hipster than Hell's Angel.
Hell's Angel, right.
It did. I mean, we're going into detail now, but eventually the Moped Army kind of went more toward the kind of gang, like the Hell's Satans was a Richmond, actually from where I'm from.
Okay.
And they really took it to a new level of pushing the boundaries of the law.
Okay.
And they got a little more gnarly as opposed to these Kalamazoo kids that were more kind of, we're just gonna have fun on our mopeds.
I feel like there's definitely a story to be told here, maybe even a movie to be made.
Absolutely, I think there have been attempts at documentaries of that culture.
What an interesting niche. Cultural activity, and then for you actually transforming into a career.
Absolutely,
which I'm sure was not on your mind at the time.
Huge impact on the trajectory of where I went. Definitely, kind of took what. I would say it was a 45-degree turn. Maybe some people might say a 180.
Yeah. So did you get a degree in architecture?
I did.
And I'm assuming at that time you were going to move to Chicago or Washington, D.C. or New York, get a job in a firm, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So what happened? Or did you do that and come back?
So I got my reasoning. I was very impetuous at that age. Obviously, you can tell, but my reasoning even to go to architecture school was sort of a little different. I didn't have I wasn't really planning on it. And really my father, as probably a wise architect, said, really didn't encourage me to go into architecture.
Okay.
But his teacher at UVA, University of Virginia, who was really influential on his thinking, was an architectural theorist, really. I guess that's the best way of saying it. Architectural theory.
Yeah.
And he then was at Notre Dame, and
I see.
So he basically was like, "Hey, you could have the chance to study under Westphal,
right?
If you went."
Who was influential for him, and thought it would be a good experience for you.
Yeah. Especially because a lot of what I was doing in undergrad was studying kind of tradition and imitation and all these concepts that tied in with that.
Yeah.
So I really went to go study theory.
Okay.
And then I was like, studio would be cool too, because I love to draw, right?
Yeah,
so I'll do it, and I had a lot of fun. But I, over the summers, instead of getting an internship, like I probably should have, if I was interested in architecture, I decided, hey, I'm going to work at this moped shop and do repair work.
Okay. So the guy that you met early on when you came here, you started working for him.
So we struck up a really good friendship. Devin is his name, Devin Beek. And really, he was a really charismatic guy, really collected a really cool group of people around that club. And I just had so much fun that he's like, hey, you want to work for me over the summers? Well, you'll get to do what you like to do.
Right.
And I was like, immediately, yes, please sign me up for this. And we just got to basically restore. It started off being like just service work. And then it turned into restorations of vintage, bikes. And then we actually got into custom mopeds. And as ridiculous as that sounds, he had clients in Chicago that, they were spending $8,000 on a moped that probably went for $800 in the 70s. So that was really, really interesting. And then we started taking those bikes and customizing them to like a completely different level, our own bikes.
Okay.
And what we ended up starting to do is make them look more like motorcycles.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you, tell me about some of those customizations. Like what were you doing to them?
So as I'm in this period, studying architecture, looking at architecture, I was also I'm looking more at bikes. That what it started in undergrad is like the aesthetic thing started becoming more like really looking at bikes and thinking about the history of motorcycling.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting phenomena, if you study the history of motorcycles, is that I'm actually working on this right now. I'm still doing this, writing blog posts about the history of motorcycles. But there was something called the cafe racer movement in the 1950s and 60s in England. And they basically took stock bikes. There were no race bikes. You couldn't buy, like today you can buy a Kawasaki, and it's basically what they're racing on MotoGP. Not exactly, but it's a high performance race machine. Back then it was just, there were road bikes, and it was like a standard motorcycle.
Okay.
And that's all you could get. And if you wanted it to look like something that was race worthy, you had to do it all yourself. That's the cafe racer movement came out of that, where you're converting these standard motorcycles into what the fast racers were competing with. And one of the things that they did was they would take a Norton chassis, which was the best handling chassis, featherbed, and they would put a Triumph engine in it.
Okay.
And they do all kinds of other stuff. They put a new aluminum tank on it or whatever, and they called it a Triton.
Okay.
So Norton with a Triton.
With the
so
Triumph
a portmanteau
engine.
with a Triton engine.
Sure.
And they got the best of both worlds, and it looked cool, and it was something to do.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, I want to do this with a moped. So I took a Batavis, which is like the slowest moped, most unupgradable.
Okay.
But in my opinion at the time, the best looking.
Okay.
It was a little different strategy here.
Yeah.
And then I put the most upgradable engine in it.
No
and I called
kidding.
it the Pukavis.
Okay.
Yeah,
Pukavis.
the Pukavis.
That is actually the word I was trying to remember that Lori said I needed to say to you. So thank you. Pukavis. That's what it was. Yep.
Yeah. So it was a total joke. I mean, it was really a parody. But I really did it. And it had this, basically looked like a Triton raw fuel tank.
Yeah.
Ducati seat on the back, a vintage Ducati seat, hopped up motor.
Yeah.
It ran some of the time.
Yeah.
It was fun though.
Yeah.
And so going through that process, then we started doing like cafe racing, which is where you put a record on the at a cafe, and then we were trying. I don't know if we ever did it, but we thought we were going to. And then you try and race back and forth by the time the song ends. Which is what the
I got
cafe
it. Yeah,
racers
did. That okay. That's great. That's where it comes from.
Yeah.
Okay.
As an idea, and so eventually, then we thought, well, we're really tired of working on other designs. We got to that point, and through the custom work that we had been doing for these bikes, we developed. And I think this is really the big catalyst was we realized that in Elkhart or in Elkhart County and the surrounding counties, we had this amazing network of people that could do a lot of different things that we needed them to do. And it all started with this Amish guy named Ernie down near south of Napanee, Indiana. And he was doing powder coating for us. So basically like paint for mopeds. And we're like, hey, do you know somebody who does this? Like welding up, if we wanted to make this thing, and he would tell us where to go. And gradually we realized, hey, we could make our own moped if we wanted to. And we can make it the way we wanted to make it.
Like from scratch.
From scratch.
Point, right? So not just modifying somebody else's, but saying like, we're going to do this thing.
We're going to do it the way that we want it to look. Yeah. And that was completely the reason that I started with that.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think that was interesting is my interest was never in just like a one-off. I mean, yes, with that Pukavis, it was a one-off. It was never going to make another one of those.
Right.
But even as a kid, drawing those cars and stuff, I was like, I had a brand name. I took my middle name and added an I on the end to make it sound Italian.
Right.
And it was, Scuderia Gardini, like Scuderia Ferrari or whatever.
I love it.
And
yes.
I thought this is really, I want to have this brand. It had a logo. It had the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it was like basically like an alternate reality. There would be this brand that had all the, specs and everything like
that. Right.
So go ahead.
So do you remember the moment that you and your friend sat down and said, like, let's make our own bike?
Yeah.
Like, were you sitting around like drinking a beer? Were you just out talking to the Amish guy about powder coating, and you just like, what was the moment that you said, we're going to do our own thing here?
Yeah. I think I might be making this up, but I think
fine.
it was, it's fine too. I I think we were at Fiddler's Hearth.
Ah.
Yeah, I lived right.
You were living behind it at the time.
Basically, like a block behind it.
Okay.
And so I spent a lot of time at Fiddler's.
Yeah.
I think we were there, and we were talking about this idea. And it's in wintertime, like January, and we're like, hey, what if we made our own? And like kind of what I was getting at there is, it wasn't going to be a one-off. We were going to do a run of these things.
Okay.
And to me, that really, in retrospect, was very telling. That we thought, hey, we're going to production. Even on, like, I think the goal was 6 of these things.
Okay.
And let's do it. So we started, and I started with basically hand drawing it, because I guess that was part of the Notre Dame thing, is we study hand drafting.
Yep. So you probably created a beautiful hand drawing of what this thing could look like.
Yep. From the side.
Yeah.
And then gradually using like architectural AutoCAD, laid out all the laser cut parts for it, because at this point we had a connection with a laser cutter, so we could have metal cut out in the shape we wanted. And over the course, we thought it was going to be a couple of months. It ended up taking over a year. We built a small motorcycle. It was we went to great lengths to make it a moped with pedals.
Okay.
It was quite a bit harder to do. We had to put pedals in it and everything.
So you were still like, do you feel like you were still clinging to this moped past that was like hard to let go of? Or?
Yeah. I mean, it was very hard to I don't think we had really thought about a motorcycle at that point. It was almost like it didn't even enter our mind that there was going to be a motorcycle. It was like, oh, we'll just make this moped. It's a logical extension of what we were doing. Right. But I guess at that point I had gotten, the connection point was in the 60s and 70s. Even into the 80s, there was actually a class of MotoGP, which is like the Formula One of motorcycling. Okay. Where they raced 50cc bikes. Wow. And these little these like things would rev up to like 20,000 RPM. They're all 2-strokes, except for Honda. They had 8 to 15 gears so that they could get them up to speed. Okay. But they were
you had to manually gear them up as you were. Okay.
Yeah. These were manual transmission little bikes, and they were basically an exercise in minimalism. Yeah. Because they were 8 inches wide. Wow. You should if you have a look up like a Kreidler is a German brand MotoGP bike from the 60s or 70s. They're incredibly beautiful.
I will look it up. And I spent a little time on your website, and I've read a couple of your blog posts too. Okay, and good. There's some beautiful. You've got some beautiful thoughts and some beautiful machines out there. Yeah.
So that was the direction we kind of went. That was the next logical kind of like, okay, 50cc, 2-stroke, kind of like a motorcycle, channeling that cafe racer vibe. Yeah. And we ended up building one. We called it that was going to be the name of our company. I guess we just named it the Paragon. Yeah, we just named it the Paragon. I thought that would be, it's like Acme or Zenith or all these old brands, like the best. Yes. It's kind of a classic name. Yes. And we came up with a logo and we built it. And it was great. It was really lived up to what we had hoped. All aluminum tank. We found a lot of suppliers through building it, though.
I bet you did. So let me back up for a second, though. So you were going to build 6 of these originally. Did you have a customer in mind?
No.
Or were you just building these and you assumed somebody?
It was for us.
They were for you.
It was for us and for some of our moped buddies.
Got it.
Yep.
Got it. So at that time you weren't thinking, oh, I'm going to sell this to somebody from Chicago.
No. Okay. It was like, hey, so-and-so is going to throw in $350. So-and-so is going to throw in, and then we're going to build them for each of us. And you'll donate your motor off of this bike for this one. And
right. And then we're going to be driving these cool custom-built machines that are all ours.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Got it.
We only built one.
Okay.
We don't get to any making
it's
any more than one.
It's a good start.
But it was definitely, it started us thinking. And we got at a photo shoot with another moped kid up in Kalamazoo.
Okay.
Great photographer. He's gone on to be a great product photographer. But that photo shoot really got us some attention. We got in some bike magazines, and we got local attention from some kind of entrepreneurs that said, have you ever started, you could make these? And we're like, I guess we could. And so that was right about the year that I graduated from Notre Dame. So it was also 2011, which is about where, I don't know if it's exactly the low point for architectural hiring, but it was pretty much.
Yeah, those were not good years.
It was the kind of the slump right after 2008 when it really hit architecture.
Yeah.
So I can't say I worked really hard at finding a job, but I was unsuccessful in the first couple of months. And so Devin and I were sitting down. We're like, let's start a brand and make motorcycles, and we're going to call it Paragon. There we go.
I love it so much because I mean, what you're describing, even going back to your youth, is like someone who actually took his dream, which was a bit crazy seeming probably to an outsider, and built it into what I'm assuming you're going to describe to us now, an actual company that is producing these amazing devices. Yep. There is something about a motorcycle, I have to say, when you look at those old designs, like they're a true piece of machinery. It feels very different than an appliance or even maybe a car today. There's something like stripped down and raw about it and powerful about it in a way that it feels, it can, maybe it's a little bit like a mechanical arm or something. Like it feels part of a person in a way that like most other mechanical devices don't.
Yeah, it took me a long time to figure out what was different about motorcycles than other machines.
Yeah.
And I've like, cause I'm kind of, I would definitely, actually, I don't know. Maybe I am a Luddite. I mean, but I have real issues with technology, both with just making it work and with the I feel like it takes, it's natural. What it just does on its own is to take control away or agency away from human beings.
I see.
That's just, that's what it's going to do. It makes the choices for you.
Yeah.
You have to, So,
but a motorcycle doesn't do that.
They don't.
Right.
And I think it took a while for me to realize that motorcycles there might be another example, but it's one of the only machines that I'm aware of, other than like a mechanical watch, I think, or things like that really serve humanity.
It's interesting because
they're human scaled.
There does seem to be a connection between like a watch guy and a motorcycle guy, or woman.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
And I think there probably is something about the craft of it and the intimacy of the human relationship to the machine.
I would even say the impracticality of it.
Fair enough.
I mean, if you want to tell time, this thing loses about 10 seconds a day.
Okay,
which is pretty good for a mechanical watch. That's not like a Kosk,
sure,
Rolex or something like that.
But it's something that you have to.
But you have to set it. I set it every day. Like I make up the difference. If you want to get from here to Los Angeles, what is the most efficient way of getting there? Yeah. It's not a motorcycle.
It is not a motorcycle.
It's arduous.
Yeah.
You're exposed to the elements.
Yeah.
You could get in an accident.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of very real reasons not to do that.
Physically taxing, right?
It's physically taxing.
About the arduous part of it, right? You have to work a little bit.
At the best, you're going to get a sunburn.
Right.
So
that's amazing.
So they're inefficient.
Yeah. So here you are. You're not getting a job in architecture quite right yet, and you say like we've already built a bike. Let's do more.
Right.
And is this time were you thinking a little bigger about like who we're going to sell this, right? It was not for us anymore. We're going to make this for other people.
Yeah. At this point, we had gotten, relatively decent response from some online motorcycle magazines. And we thought, okay, right at that point, this cafe racer that I mentioned earlier, there was a renewal or renaissance of cafe racing, starting in about the mid 2000s. And then by 2011, it might have been on the downswing. I don't know, but we just thought this is it. We make a cafe racer. People are going to love it. It's lightweight.
Yeah.
We're going to channel our moped experience.
Yeah.
And somehow along the way, I got really distracted with that history that I was looking into. And I started going back further than the 1960s.
Okay.
And finding, especially motorcycles, I think a little after the dawn of motorcycling was like even the 1890s. There were some early steam powered and really wacky of motorcycles, and they really were figuring things out.
Sure.
And so by the 1920s, things had kind of formalized enough that there was a form that had taken shape, and it was really powerful. Okay. And I was really captivated by that. And so we kind of did this hard shift at one point from this cafe racer idea to a hardtail, kind of something that looked like it might have been a 1920s motorcycle. And it was kind of, it was no market research would have told me that would have been popular at all. I can just hands down tell you right now.
Okay, well,
I mean, that's a personal preference.
That was a follow-up question I was going to have. So you really did. You thought this was a good idea.
I thought it was
because you loved it, and it was cool.
Yeah, it looked good.
Yeah,
and it fascinated me. So,
and you convinced your
convinced
your partner,
my partner to do it.
Let's build this thing.
Yeah, and we thought, I guess that one of the excuses I used was, well, if it doesn't have rear suspension, it'll be easier to make. We don't have to engineer a swing arm.
And at this time, were you making it in your garage, or like what does production of a motorcycle look like?
Yeah.
Or I suppose you were still figuring that out, at least at scale at that point.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So Devin's moped shop was kind of the model for how we would do this, and it really still, the way we do things is different than other manufacturers, and responsible for probably the success we've had so far. And that is, we have a very small shop, very low overhead, small Midwestern town.
Yep.
At this point, from the Paragon days, we had moved from Elkhart down to Goshen at that point, Goshen, Indiana. So 40 minutes from here.
Yeah, roughly speaking. Yep.
And had a little small space there.
Okay.
But we were partnering with these suppliers in the county.
Sure.
And so the same shop that made that first Paragon with us became our main supplier.
Okay.
They still are.
And they still are.
It's an Amish shop. And basically we took over the back half back 16th of their shop, a little corner spot, and they let us develop the model there.
Okay.
And so we did everything from developing the tooling to make the parts to then making the first parts for the first bike.
Okay.
And then basically once we had gotten that prototype out of the way, we would hand off production to them. So this is definitely a collaboration with a lot of people involved. It's the only way it would work. And then those parts would go from, they would get cut out of raw metal. They would go to that shop and get welded together. They go to another shop and get sandblasted. They go to another shop and get painted.
Wow.
Or polished, whatever. And they come back to us, and then we would do final assembly. So it's not all happening in one spot.
Right.
And we're not hiring anyone at this point. We're just paying for the part.
So at the end, you're just getting a giant box of parts, and then you're assembling that into a bike.
Yep.
Were you, I'm imagining a lot of motorcycle companies or other companies, they're buying off the shelf parts. I mean, your engines engines are coming from a manufacturer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You're buying Honda engines, or is that your preference?
We use engines that are based on Honda engines.
Based on Honda engines.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can get into all the details. Yeah.
Sure. But the actual bike itself, you're really custom.
Correct.
Manufacturing it.
Yep. Custom is a weird word.
Part by part.
Because it implies like you're making it for somebody custom. So I always have this dichotomy where I'm like, and our customers have the same question. They're like, I'm getting this custom bike, and I'm like, well, actually, it's production, but it's also custom.
I see what you're saying. I think I mean it in the sense that you're not ordering 10,000 widgets from Amazon to make this bike out of.
Right.
You're actually making those parts yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Each one is not custom in the sense that it's individual, but there's still, it's your design, your production.
Correct. Yeah. So I mean, that's true. In some cases, we are buying off the shelf, but that's like anybody. Key switches. Okay, we're gonna find one that's really nice, and then we'll bolt that onto our bike.
Right.
The way I describe it is, we outsource specialty components.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Specialty components on a motorcycle would be DOT lighting, which is like regulated by the Department of Transportation.
Right.
Engines.
Yep.
Shock absorbers and suspension components, which there's other people that know how to do that way better than we do.
Sure.
What else? Those would be the main ones that we would outsource to other people. We even made our own wiring harnesses at first.
Oh, wow.
Since then, we've realized that hiring somebody who knows exactly what they're doing makes more sense. So we outsource that to a wiring. But that's what Harley Davidson does too.
Right. No, of course. I mean, that's what...
wheels would be another specialty item that we have.
Right.
You're making a wheel rim is a very specialized art.
You don't have a rubber plantation.
Right. Well, and tires, of course.
Tires,
yeah. Of course. Yeah. So
that's interesting. So, but this time you weren't making the Paragon. You were making a new one. So the Paragon was just like a single... There was only one
off, and it's a moped. And so I think we really thought, oh, well, I guess at this point we can't do a moped.
Okay.
We actually looked at moped engines for a little bit. We're like, I think to make this up, and that was really thinking about business. We're like, I think we have to make this a motorcycle.
Okay.
To make it saleable.
So at that point, you were sort of thinking about customers.
A little bit of realism
you
there.
were like, okay, we got to sell this to somebody or else, because it's going to be expensive to make it, and
But it was a 50cc still, and a 2-stroke.
50cc 2-stroke, and you did no market research.
Right.
You just followed your instincts and your passion when it came to design. Yeah. So what happened?
So we
did you intend to build multiple of this new version? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. This was like, okay, we're going to go into production. We're going to try and sell these all over the country.
Right.
See what happens.
Right.
So we basically, it was just the two of us, started producing these.
Yeah.
Just like we've talked about, and started selling them. We got good press just for a small company. That was it's such a unique thing that people were like, oh, what, you're making what? Okay, we'll run a story on this. And so we started selling them, but it wasn't something where we had a marketing team or a sales team or anything like that. So there were very limited number of sales, and we weren't paying ourselves anything.
That seems like could be a problem. Yeah. How did you find your first customer, or who was your first customer? Do you remember your first few customers?
First customer was one of our powder coaters.
One of your powder coaters. Yeah. Look at that.
Bought number one.
Yeah.
I think they still have it.
Okay.
We delivered it to them without oil or gas because they were going to put it in a box. I think they were just going to.
Okay.
They knew it was something cool.
Okay. So this was like almost a collector's
glass
item.
case. Yeah. I hope that's still there.
Wow.
But and then it was local entrepreneurs, I think, were the first takers.
Okay. So people who knew you knew what you were doing, or
they heard about it somehow.
Heard about you through a friend or an acquaintance or something.
Yeah. I think that would be the best way. And then we just started, completely organic marketing, like Facebook, Instagram. We got some Chicago videographers were like, hey, can I make a video about this because it's really cool?
Yeah.
And then we'd put that up on Vimeo or something,
right.
And it would get a couple of sales. And I think at that point we were averaging like 15 sales a year.
Okay.
At most.
Okay.
And one bike essentially funded the parts for the next one.
Got it.
And
still not paying yourself.
No.
Okay.
So I was
assuming you were doing something else to put food on the table at that point.
Yeah, we're kind of freelancing some design work for some moped parts.
Oh, no kidding. Okay. So
aftermarket
still in the moped world.
Absolutely. Yeah. For a Kalamazoo moped army guy.
Got it.
And then I taught some architectural stuff at like a little community college.
Yeah.
And then what else did I do? My wife worked as a waitress.
That's helpful.
At Venturi Pizza in Goshen.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Excellent.
We lived above it for briefly.
You seem also to be attracted to really nice places to eat and drink. Yeah.
Part of
Fiddlers, Venturi's.
Part of being both my undergrad and Notre Dame was spending time in Rome.
Yeah.
And that really spoilt me for lovely places and good food and motorcycles.
Yeah. Really. It's kind of the convergence of everything you love.
Yeah.
So,
we muddled along in retrospect, I don't know how I convinced my wife to do it. And we lived in basically, the poverty, having fun, but but struggling along.
So much of entrepreneurship sounds like this.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing something. Probably, if you're 50 and you're looking back at yourself, you'd say, I never would do that.
Yeah,
but you
don't have as much to lose.
Yeah. Right. I guess it's probably your thinking, right? How much do we have to lose right now?
Right. Yeah, and then having that architecture degree maybe was a little bit of a safety net, kind of too. Like maybe I could always go back and that's what I ended up doing.
Yeah.
Eventually, we got to a point where it just wasn't financially making sense, and so I ended up moving back to Virginia working with my father for about 1.5 years.
Okay.
But what I was really doing, simultaneously was moonlighting, doing the sales and marketing and design for Janus as well.
Okay.
So that was
still happening, even though you were in Virginia. That was still happening here.
Yeah. My spare time was really devoted to sales. Mainly what I was doing was sales, marketing, and design.
Yep.
And meanwhile, my business partner was doing all the fabrication, orchestration, and assembly of the motorcycles.
Mm-hmm.
And really a lot of the kind of hands-on design. Like if he needed to just make something work, he just do it on the floor. Yeah. Meanwhile, I'd be doing the overall aesthetic and look.
Right.
So that went on for about a year and a half. And then 2 guys, local guys, a videographer and photographer, and kind of both of them were working in marketing at that point, joined or expressed interest.
Okay.
And wanted to work with us. And I was taking the train out from Virginia a couple of times a year. Well, more than that actually, to make sure everything was going okay.
Sure.
And I think I got to a certain point where I was basically like, we have the potential. They have video experience. They can help us with our website, marketing campaigns.
Yep.
If we want to do this, I've got to go all in. And so that summer of 2014, I just quit.
So you're like, Dad, I got to break your heart here. I'm leaving. I'm going back to Goshen.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And so the little firm we were both working at, I had to quit there, and then just packed all my stuff up, all our stuff, family stuff up, and moved back. Yeah. Had a little apartment, no guaranteed paycheck at that point.
Yeah. I mean, I ask you about the money side of it. I mean, I think you're starting to grow, or I mean, the story is going to go towards growth here.
I saw potential.
You saw the potential. So you can continue telling the story, but at some point I want to make sure you touch on, like, where did the money come from? Like, did you have to borrow money? Did you have people who decided to invest in you?
Yep.
Put capital forward so that you could make this happen? People obviously believed in you.
Yes. So when we first started, we really were green. I mean, I think I would say my Devin had more business from running a moped shop than I had.
Sure.
Entrepreneurial spirit. I really was just more in the art kind of space, just student.
Designer, passionate ideas.
And we somehow got in front of, I think it was an Elevate Ventures.
Yes.
Entrepreneur in Goshen, lived in Goshen.
That's great.
Found us, and he connected us with a South Bend angel investor group.
Okay.
Called Magnet. I don't even know if they're still around.
I've not heard of it, but I'll have to look it up. Magnet. Okay. So
Magnet investors.
Yep.
And they did not invest in us so much. They offered us a loan. Or wasn't it? I can't even remember. I think it was a loan.
Okay.
Because we must have looked like, I'm surprised they gave us any money at all. Yeah. But we came in with our little, Elevate helped us kind of work up a pitch deck, which we had no experience with whatsoever.
Sure.
I remember them asking us about Gantt charts, and I'm like, what's that?
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it.
They do use those in architecture too. Well, the contractor does. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I remember at this point I had one professional practice class.
Right.
Everything else was studio.
Right.
They don't really tell you how to run a business.
No, they do not.
So they gave us $25,000.
Okay.
And that's what we ran with for 3 years.
Okay.
So
you
ate it up pretty quickly.
You leveraged that money though, and enough that you could keep your operations growing.
Get the parts in initially to start to build the first bike.
Yeah.
And then that one we just kind of kept rolling over to the next one.
Sure.
So moved back, no paycheck. We were just like, we're gonna make it work. My wife was gonna sew clothing. I think it was one idea. We're gonna open a printing press. My family's historically been into printing, and I have a old fashioned letterpress press, and I was like, we're gonna run a printing press.
You are attracted to the old school crafts, the mechanical watches, printing presses, sewing,
So within a month or two, I was able to start taking a small paycheck. We hired a first employee. We're like, we gotta figure out how to. We just got to do it. And I remember it just being a decision. We're gonna just start paying ourselves, and we're gonna hire somebody, and we're gonna make it work from there. And I think that was a really good decision. You have to just jump in, and figure out what's gonna happen.
Mm-hmm.
And selling a couple more bikes, and then I'm trying to condense this story. We decided with these 2 marketing guys, Grant and Jordan, that we were gonna. The other idea was that this 50cc 2-stroke was never going to pass emissions testing. So we were limited to how many we could create or sell. And so we're going to start a Kickstarter campaign that's going to fund our EPA certification.
Okay. Why not?
Yep. And we did.
And it worked.
It worked. It worked in kind of a roundabout way.
Okay.
We sold wax canvas and leather goods that we had a local Amish guy making for us. We still sell them. We still work with him.
Okay.
They're beautiful. But we doubled our goal.
Okay.
but that was great.
Because this was a certification that you had to get.
Basically, if we wanted to sell more than a very limited number of bikes.
Okay, got it.
And we wanted to get into California, which we thought was a big market. We needed to get this. So where I'm going with it is that the Kickstarter was great. Kickstarters are challenging. A lot of times that money disappears a lot faster than you think it is.
Yeah, I imagine.
But it was fine. We could do it again. There's a whole business around coaching people to how to do that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But what it really got us was exposure. We got a lot of press from that. Through making the videos for it, the updates.
Sure.
And we found 2 local business owners.
Okay.
They found us in a syndicated story in Agri News or some kind of agricultural.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, like we're totally random.
So they stumble across you and
I think over wine, they too, over a bottle of wine, thought, hey, we're going to invest in these guys. We're going to make a motorcycle company. And they did. They gave us the next step up, which was still not a whole lot by today's standards for starting a motorcycle company. And
it is an audacious idea.
It is very audacious.
At least on paper, right? It sounds like an audacious thing.
But if you do audacious things, it's fun because you get people buy in. Oh, it'll turn people off too. They're like, oh, no way, that's crazy. But you also get people that are like, that's cool.
Exactly.
And you get more attention that way too.
And you actually had a bike. We
had a bike. We showed that we could do it.
We've done this, right? Yeah. We know what we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, at least we can make one.
Yeah.
So we did.
So these fellows invested as well.
They invested in us, and we went to EPA. We got EPA certification in California.
Nice.
With a new motor. This was we had to ditch our 2-stroke love and our 50cc, and we went to 250cc, which for us was like, it's a big bike.
Yeah.
And got California certification, full EPA, and then we went through and checked all of the boxes in terms of like DOT, highway safety, highway safety, really up to everything to be legit.
That must have been a learning curve too.
Absolutely.
Just making sure you knew all the boxes that you needed to check.
Yeah, I was just joking with our kind of engineer emeritus, we call him, and we were looking through this motorcycle engineering book because we're designing another model right now. And,
cool.
And we were just joking because they're like, these engineering books on motorcycling, they all tell you how to modify your bike to make it work better. Okay. No one tells you how to make it from scratch. There is no book on this.
Well, there's another project for you. Yeah.
So it's just like, with all these things, you're basically finding an EPA consultant.
Right.
It took me a year.
Yeah. Who does that?
Who does that? There's like almost no one.
At the scale that you're working at, obviously like the big companies know this stuff.
Or they have their own lab.
Yeah, right. Right. Tell me about your customers today.
Yeah.
Like, where are you at? Like, okay, let's ask this. What is the furthest you've sold a bike? Have you sent one to Japan? Have you sent one to St. Petersburg, Russia?
Yeah.
No kidding.
I think, St. Petersburg. It's not it's either Moscow or St. Petersburg. I can't remember.
Yeah.
That was a 50cc actually.
No kidding.
Yeah.
And so they found you and fell in love with what you were doing and ordered a bike.
Yep. And we said, well, we can deliver it to any U.S. port of your choice, but we can't handle export. And that's always been our line is, we don't have, we can pay for U.S. certification, but after that, it's just like the level. Where do we go to EU? Do we go to Asia? Where do we take this? So, we haven't gotten that far yet.
Yeah. So most of your customers are U.S. based.
Most of our customers are 50, the lower 48, but we have them in Alaska and Hawaii as well.
Wow.
And there's a heavy concentration in the upper Midwest, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, Ohio.
That makes sense.
And that makes sense both from our location, because we don't have dealers,
right?
But also, if you look at a map of motorcycle ownership, Michigan is actually, I think it's still the highest per capita.
No kidding. Michigan, you wouldn't think it because you can't.
Yeah.
You can't ride a bike half the year.
Yeah, you can't ride it very much. But I think they want to get their fun when they can.
Soak it in during the 3 months of summer. Yeah. That is interesting. So you're still seeing a lot of sales happening there.
Oh yeah.
Are your customers? I mean, I would assume that they're interested in the vintage nature of your bikes and the good, the really high quality design.
Yeah,
that differentiates them from the guy in the Harley or the European style bike or whatever it might be.
Yeah, the design is a big part of why people are buying these things. It's a big part of why motorcycles are things that exist, I think, too.
Yeah.
Like design. I always make the point that motorcycles have to work, but they also have to look good. They have to look fast too.
Interesting.
Like a car.
So as you're designing it, you're thinking about making it look fast.
Well, like it has to look like it has motion. At least, and the materials have to be, they have to look good. Like a car, the best material or one of the best materials for production for brakes, always, is cast iron.
Yeah.
It's a cast material. With a motorcycle, you have to make them out of stainless steel, which is not necessarily the best material, but otherwise it would rust. And that wouldn't look good.
Yeah.
Look at your car. If you park your car for a week, they start rusting.
Right.
But you can't see it.
Right. Because it's all hidden behind. Yeah. Right.
Same thing with the rest of the wiring harness on a car.
That is interesting. So you've got to think a lot about what all these exposed elements that a car can just hide behind a panel or
absolutely.
Yeah. And so in that sense, it's also just, you have that connection, a little more connection with it because it's all right there for you to see.
Yes.
Yeah. That's amazing. I'm wondering a couple questions. So you've obviously had like a lot of advice along the way.
Yeah.
You had Devin.
Yeah.
Who else would you say were instrumental, maybe even on the business side? Like who gave you the confidence? Did you have someone who gave you the confidence on that side of the equation? Since you were a great designer, obviously, and passionate. Were there folks who intervened at critical times for you?
Yeah.
That made this possible?
Yeah. I mean, Goshen, and I think South Bend too, and Elkhart, there's a really strong entrepreneurial spirit.
Yep.
And we can credit that for a lot of things. I mean, Studebaker, the RV industry, there's all kinds of people making things.
Yep, making things.
And that we felt that right away in Goshen. We were really welcomed in by even the city, like kind of made us like, okay, we'll help you find a place to start a business.
That's great.
And Elevate, that one guy expressed interest in us and helped us initially.
Yep.
And then those first two investors that I mentioned that found us, one of them, Bruce, is still an investor.
Okay.
And
that's great.
Instrumental part of the company. And I would say a mentor to me and to all of us on a really deep level. And then we've also, our families, I think, have been a big help there. One big mentor for me probably is a old engineer. He used to work out at Bendix.
Okay.
Plant.
Yeah. West of downtown. Yeah.
Yep. And I'm not sure what year he retired. Before we started Janus.
Okay.
Motorcycle nut.
Yeah.
He has taught me more about design and engineering and actually humanity, I think, than anyone else.
How did you find him, or did he find you?
We were talking to a local motorcycle shop, and we're like, "Hey, we need somebody to help us with our wiring harness. We're having issues." And they're like, "Well, you could call Ken, but you got to watch out." He's like, I think they said, he's really smart and he can really make you feel like they were kind of saying like belittle you or something like that.
Okay.
And so we were like really nervous, like, hello, can you help me? He's like, okay, fine. And he did kind of, he's definitely like a really good engineer. The scientific method is like how he operates. But right away, we realized he was this really cool dude. He'd make fun of you or whatever, but
I assume he was probably impressed with what you were attempting to do too.
He's now actually invested in us.
Like the audacity of like, hey, these guys are going to just like
he's now a business partner.
Build motorcycles.
And he's still, he was in our shop yesterday helping me with an engineering problem.
That is fantastic.
Just incredible. Incredible. And I go on motorcycle trips with him and it's great.
So you've been around long enough doing this work that you're probably a mentor yourself at this point.
I don't know.
What advice would you give your young self or a young entrepreneur in the region? Say that at least, right?
Well,
or the 20-year-old architecture student who's not sure that she wants to do architecture.
Yeah,
I don't
know about that one. One of our recent, I'm not mentioning all my mentors. There's a lot of them, but a guy who came on, who's actually started as a customer and then became a business partner and mentor. He's now our CFO.
Okay.
Has taught me a lot about the lesson that I think is probably the most important, just as a general thing. And this is true of anything, whether it's, but especially in business, it's the relationships that you make. And I know this sounds trite, but I knew that was like I knew that I needed to be concentrating on relationships, but he just like doubled down on it.
Okay.
And he basically is like, that is the most important thing you can be doing, is developing connections with your customers. I mean, it bears out with him because for whatever reason, I made a good connection with him and I maintained it. And then he turned out to be an investor and a repeat customer and now he's your business. We're in business with him.
We're in business with him. Wow. So, but he started as a customer. So that relationship started from that. Yeah, that's amazing.
I mean, he's like as simple as like getting back to somebody.
Yeah.
Just, remembering their name, just being like when you. I mean, he's just so good. I mean, he's better than I am at it. But like when somebody calls, you get back to them.
Yeah.
And I fail that all the time, but so important.
It's interesting.
Life-changing.
Another Goshen company, ViewRail, Lynn Morris was in here a few weeks ago.
His son was in our shop this morning.
There you go. But he was saying a similar thing, about the importance of getting back to people and following through and making making those commitments to the people that you're working with and for.
And same thing with employees.
Yeah.
It's just, and you can be more or less successful at it, but I think it's something you can always do better at.
Yeah. So I like to close the podcast by asking about what you do outside of work. So sometimes phrase it like, what are you doing to help make the region a better place to live, to work, to play? And I think maybe before we started recording, you mentioned zoning. As something that you were doing outside of your job as a motorcycle designer and manufacturer. Can you tell us a little bit more about what other activities you're doing in the region?
Yeah. I always wax too long, but when I was one summer that I didn't do motorcycles, I got an internship in Italy and worked with this Italian architect.
Nice.
And urban designer. And I learned about his type of urban thinking. And it made a big impact on me. Mm-hmm. And my father and I started a blog about urbanism and urban design based really on our hometown of Richmond, Virginia.
Okay.
But that just sparked a real interest. And this is while I was in school studying architecture.
Sure.
And we do kind of a combination of, it should be more combined, I think, at Notre Dame, but urbanism and architecture.
Right.
They're the same thing.
Yeah.
But through that, gradually I just became more and more interested in it, and then found the work of Chuck Marone and the Strong Towns movement.
Yep.
And that dovetails really well with Muratori, who's this Italian guy that not many people know about, and that we really think is important. And then there was going to be a development in Goshen. And it was completely antithetical to everything that I think is what we need, and I got really vocal about it. And kind of got into loggerheads a little bit with the redevelopment commission and zoning, and I really felt like this is crazy. This shouldn't be happening. So I thought,
good for you.
I'm going to try and get on redevelopment, and they wouldn't let me do that, and I don't think they ever will. But
to actually join the redevelopment commission in Goshen.
I'm going to stop this because I just felt like it was, to some level,
don't give up.
A little backwards.
Yeah.
But they appeased me by putting me on the planning commission.
I see.
And I've been on it for like 4 or 5 years now.
Okay.
And I enjoy it. I think it's a good way to give back.
Yeah.
It a little bit hamstrung, I think, but we have a new mayor in Goshen, and Gina is really interested in, or it seems like she's interested in strong towns. I've been pitching it to her for a while.
Sure.
And so we've just had him in town. Anyway, I'm trying to be involved that way.
So you're using your role on the planning commission sort of to advocate for better urbanism, and
right now a zoning reform idea coming before us that I'd like to try and promote and support. And then the last thing is I've been able to keep my architecture going a little bit too.
Okay.
We have my parish, St. Mary's, is an Orthodox Christian church on the southeast side of Goshen.
I've heard of it. Yeah. Interesting.
And we are growing like crazy. And I mean, to the point where we do not have enough room in our current little pole barn. And so they were gracious enough to let me design a new temple for them. And so we basically raised the funds. We've designed it, and I'm using my Notre Dame it's a classical basilica.
Okay, got it.
In the language of the Amish countryside.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. So it's not in the city. It's out.
No, it's outside.
It's outside.
It's outside
in a more
next
rural,
to our current building. And
got it.
So I'm hoping
that's really fascinating.
Either late this year or early next year we'll break ground.
Wow. So you'll be managing the construction of motorcycles and the construction
on some level. I'm more of the what do they call the design architect? Yeah, there we go.
Sure.
Not the architect of record.
Sure. Design architect, right? Then you hand the drawings off to the person who's going to finish it off. Yeah. That's a good place to be.
It is a good place to be.
That's a good place.
I don't have to worry about all the codes and
right. Somebody else does that stuff for you. Yeah. Well, good for you. I mean, this has been really fascinating, and what a great
fun conversation.
What a great journey of someone who like took something that they were interested in as a child and had the audacity to make it into an actual company that's thriving. Awesome. I mean, it's great. And I will say too, I think your motorcycles are gorgeous.
Thank you.
I'm not a motorcycle guy either, but
you don't have to be.
No, I don't. And when I look at motorcycles though, I'm not attracted to the big chrome machines. But when I see your motorcycles, I'm like, it kind of reminds me of I loved Indiana Jones when I was a kid.
Yeah.
These like German motorcycles from 1940 or something like that with a little sidecar next to them.
Yep.
I loved that stuff. And I know your motorcycles aren't that, but they kind of remind me of like this simpler version of what a motorcycle could be.
There's a whole conversation there.
Yeah, I'm sure there is. Well, Richard, we're going to let you go back to your work. So thank you so much for being on with us. And we cannot wait to keep following you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah.
Really
great.
Fun conversation.